72%. That is the number we are starting with today. Welcome to today's deep dive. I am your host. And if you are a curious learner who just wants to bypass the usual environmental guilt trips, you are in the right place.
Yeah, we're getting straight to the hard data today. I'm thrilled to be here to help unpack this.
Because that 72%, it's not about faceless multinational corporations. It's not corrupt governments or, towering industrial smokestacks. 72% of all global greenhouse gas emissions are actually driven by your grocery cart.
Right. It completely flips the traditional narrative. I mean, government consumption only accounts for about 10%, and
Mhm.
corporate investment is roughly 18%.
Wow.
Yeah, leaving that massive 72% resting squarely on the shoulders of ordinary household consumption.
Which is wild. So today we are pulling from a really comprehensive stack of sources. We've got university lectures on sustainable consumption, data from the Global Footprint Network, the WWF, and some massive recent consumer behavior
A
surveys.
lot of ground to cover.
It is, yeah. But our mission is to decode the actual machinery of global supply chains. We really want to understand the gap between what we say we want for the planet and, well, what we actually end up paying for at the register.
So to understand how we wield that massive 70% influence, we first have to understand how our impact is even measured. Because usually the conversation just begins and ends with carbon footprint.
Right. Everyone knows the phrase carbon footprint,
Yeah,
but the sources make it very clear that carbon is only like half the equation.
exactly. Carbon gets all the headlines, mostly because it's directly tied to immediate climate change. A carbon footprint measures the volume of greenhouse gases, usually quantified in carbon dioxide equivalents, right, that are released into the atmosphere by any given activity.
Which is fundamentally a waste metric.
Yes, precisely. It tells us how much we're altering the atmosphere and heating up the planet. But if you only look at carbon, you're missing the underlying economic reality of how we use the planet itself. And that is where the ecological footprint comes in.
Okay, so the ecological footprint isn't measuring gas in the air. It's measuring essentially real estate.
Right. It measures the human demand on the Earth's regenerative capacity. So the unit of measurement here isn't tons of carbon, it's global hectares.
Global hectares.
Yeah. The researchers calculate how many standardized hectares of forest, pasture, farmland, and marine ecosystems are required to do two completely different jobs simultaneously. First, the land has to generate the resources we extract.
Like the timber, the food, the fibers.
Exactly. And second, that same land has to absorb the waste we produce, which includes absorbing those carbon emissions.
So think of it this way. Your carbon footprint is kind of like looking at your monthly spending on a single credit card. But your ecological footprint, that's a complete audit of your entire net worth and your bank account.
That is a perfect way to look at it, a biological balance sheet, and the university lectures provided the hard math for the year 2023. If we look at the supply side first, the entire planet has about 12.2 billion global hectares of biocapacity available.
Okay, 12.2 billion. That is the total productive, life-sustaining surface area we have.
Right. Now, if you take that absolute limit and divide it by the global population, which is roughly 8.1 billion people,
Hmm.
you get our per capita biological allowance.
The budget, basically.
Yes. And it works out to 1.5 global hectares per person.
Hmm.
That is a sustainable budget. If everyone operates within that 1.5 hectares, the planet can renew everything we take and absorb everything we throw away without degrading the system.
Okay, but our actual footprint, right, the demand side of the ledger, it's 20.8 billion global hectares,
Yeah.
which means divided by the population, the average human is currently demanding 2.6 global hectares.
Which is a massive deficit. We are basically overdrawing our Earth bank account by 1.1 hectares per person globally every single year.
Every year.
Every year. And if you look at the historical data mapping this over time, this isn't a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
We actually crossed the threshold into global ecological deficit in the early 1970s.
The 1970s.
Yeah. The charts show this nearly perfect correlation between the explosion of global GDP over the last 50 years and our material footprint. As the global economy industrialized and, well, got richer, we simply extracted more raw materials to fuel that growth.
But wait, if we are overdrawing this biological bank account so heavily, we run into a really obvious contradiction.
How so?
Because if you walk around certain parts of Europe or North America, the wealthiest, highest consuming regions on the planet, it doesn't look like an ecological wasteland.
Right, right.
The air in Zurich or Seattle is clear. The local lakes are pristine. The forests are protected. So how does a massive global deficit square with these incredibly clean local environments?
That tension brings us to one of the most vital mechanisms in our source material, the outsourcing illusion.
The outsourcing illusion,
Yeah.
huh?
To understand why those wealthy cities look so clean, we have to look at the difference between a closed economy and an open economy.
Okay, break that down for us.
In a theoretical closed economy, a country produces everything its citizens consume right inside its own borders. So the steel is smelted locally, the clothes are dyed locally. In that scenario, the pollution happens right next to the consumer.
But obviously, we don't live in a closed economy. We live in a hyper-globalized, open economy.
Which completely changes the accounting. Countries like Switzerland, the US, and the UK have essentially shifted their energy-intensive, highly polluting industrial base to less developed nations.
They outsource the dirty work.
Exactly.
It's like an ecological tax haven. It's like sweeping all the dirt into your neighbor's yard and then boasting about how spotless your own floors are.
That is exactly what is happening. They get all the physical goods, but none of the local smog. And the data comparing territorial emissions to consumption-based emissions proves this out perfectly.
Territorial versus consumption-based.
Right. Territorial emissions only track the pollution physically created within a country's borders. If you look at those graphs, the US, the UK, and Switzerland look like they are making incredible progress. Their territorial emissions are steadily dropping.
Because the factories are gone.
Exactly. But when researchers calculate their consumption-based emissions, which factors in the pollution generated overseas to manufacture the goods they import, those lines are significantly higher. And in many cases, they're still climbing.
And let me guess, a country like China shows the exact inverse of that.
You nailed it. Their territorial emissions are massive, way higher than their own consumption emissions, because they are acting as the factory floor for Western demand.
There is a specific case study in the sources looking at Swiss households from 2019 that really highlights this, right?
Yes, the Swiss data. It breaks down the greenhouse gas footprint by household expenditure. The primary drivers are transportation, housing, and food. But the breakdown for clothing and shoes is what really illustrates the open economy.
Oh, because of fast fashion and everything.
Yeah. The footprint for the clothing worn by Swiss citizens is almost entirely categorized as import-related emissions. The actual domestic emissions for producing clothing inside Switzerland barely even register on the chart.
Okay, but I have a real pushback here, and I think a lot of you listening might feel the same way. If a textile factory in Southeast Asia decides to power its looms with cheap, dirty coal instead of renewables, right? Or they decide to dump chemical dyes into a local river just to save money on waste treatment.
Yeah.
How is the consumer responsible for that? I mean, the consumer didn't build the coal plant. If a company decides to maximize its profit margins by using destructive practices, isn't it the companies polluting, not the individuals?
Yeah.
You can't pin 72% of the blame on a guy just trying to buy a pair of running shoes.
It is entirely logical to look at the entity physically releasing the pollutants and assign them the blame. I get that. But if we look at the underlying economic mechanics outlined in the lectures, we have to understand how supply chains are actually designed.
Meaning they don't operate in a vacuum.
Right. The sources explicitly state that while corporations certainly consider factors like technology, local laws, and raw material prices, the ultimate overriding parameter when setting up a supply chain is consumer preference.
Okay, but are we actively asking them to pollute?
Not explicitly, but supply chains are ruthlessly optimized for the exact price point and convenience level that the market dictates. If consumers demand a $5 t-shirt, the supply chain manager has to reverse engineer a process that allows for a $5 retail price while still maintaining a profit margin for the company.
And that mathematical reality is what dictates the use of the cheap coal plant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the unregulated dye facility. The lecture material states a very stark principle here. There is no sustainable production without sustainable consumption. The corporation is certainly executing the dirty process, yes, but they are doing it because the consumer's purchasing habits created an environment where that is the most competitive strategy.
So that 72% figure, it isn't about who flipped the switch at the factory. It's about who created the financial demand signal for the factory to exist in the first place.
You got it.
Okay, so if our demand signal is setting the pace of extraction, how fast are we actually running? Because the source material uses a really compelling, kind of terrifying visual for this called the calendar of overshoot.
Yeah, the Global Footprint Network calculates something called overshoot day.
Overshoot day.
Right. They take that 1.5 global hectare allowance we discussed earlier, and they analyze the lifestyle and consumption habits of different countries. Then, they calculate the exact date the Earth would run out of renewable resources for the year if the entire global population consumed at the rate of that specific country.
Okay, let's walk through some of these dates because they really put this abstract math into perspective for you.
Okay, so if everyone in the world lived the lifestyle of the average resident of Qatar, the Earth's entire renewable resource budget for the year would run dry on February 6th.
February 6th? I mean, imagine it's early March, you're just taking down your Valentine's Day decorations, and boom, your country has already spent the entire planet's resource budget for the year. That is shocking.
It is. Now, if everyone lived like the average person in the United States, Overshoot Day lands on March 13th.
Still incredibly early.
Yeah, mathematically, it would require 5 Earths to sustain the American lifestyle globally.
5 Earths. And what about Switzerland? Because we were talking about how clean it looks.
Even Switzerland hits its limit on May 7th, requiring 2.9 Earths.
Wow. Okay, but when you hit Overshoot Day, what does that actually mean mechanically? I mean, if a bank account hits 0, your card declines. But we obviously keep shopping in April and May, so how does a planet operate in overdraft?
You start eating into the principal instead of living off the interest.
Oh,
When a nation is in ecological overshoot, it means they're cutting down timber faster than forests can regrow. They're pumping groundwater faster than aquifers can recharge. Overfishing oceans to the point of population collapse. And importantly, emitting more carbon than the available biomass can sequester.
and the global average for Overshoot Day sits at 1.7 Earths right now.
Correct. But the sources also highlight how wildly uneven this distribution is globally.
Yeah, because while Western hyper-industrialized nations are burning through multiple planets' worth of resources, a country like India operates at a completely different scale.
Right. If the whole world lived like the average resident of India, we would only use 0.7 Earths.
Meaning they are living well within the biological boundaries of the planet.
Yes. And it's highly structural. It involves different modes of transportation, different agricultural footprints, less reliance on disposable, single-use consumer goods, and just a fundamentally different infrastructural approach to daily life.
So we have this hard math, we have these terrifying overshoot dates, and, you know, it's not like the international community is blind to this reality. The sources point to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 12.
Sustainable consumption and production.
Right. And they're calling for fundamental changes. Properly managing chemicals, heavily reducing waste generation, having global food waste. But if the UN is waving red flags and the scientific community is publishing this data, why are the malls still packed? Do consumers just not know?
Well, the consumer surveys included in the source material suggest something much more complicated than just ignorance.
Really?
Yeah. A major European Union survey found that an overwhelming 94% of EU citizens state that protecting the environment is personally important to them.
94%. I mean, getting 94% of people to agree on literally anything is statistically miraculous.
I know, right? It shows massive cultural awareness. They cite climate change, air pollution, and growing waste as major top-of-mind concerns. And when they're asked about who's responsible, 80% say that big business and industry aren't doing enough.
Shifting the blame again?
Partially, yeah. But interestingly, 67% also acknowledge that citizens themselves could be doing more.
Okay, so they know the problem, they know business is failing, and they even know they share the blame. But the sources show it actually goes further than just answering survey questions about blame. The recent data from consulting firms, Bain & Company and PwC, shows people are claiming they're ready to put their money where their mouth is.
Yes. The data from late 2023 and mid-2024 shows that consumers are increasingly experiencing the effects of climate change firsthand, mostly through extreme weather events.
Right, the floods, the heat waves.
Exactly. And because of that, they report a high willingness to pay what they call a sustainability premium. The PwC survey found consumers willing to pay a 9.7% premium for eco-friendly products. The Bain study found claims of up to 12% more.
And they are reporting this despite heavy ongoing concerns about inflation. Right.
Yes, despite the cost of living crisis, they say they're willing to pay more.
People are explicitly telling researchers that they will absorb a 10 to 12% price hike just to make the sustainable choice. So, what is the catch? Why isn't the market rapidly shifting?
Because of a psychological mechanism the researchers call the intention-action gap.
The intention-action gap.
Yeah. The research explicitly notes that attitudes toward environmental issues do not equal actual shifts in general behaviors, lifestyles, and purchasing. What people say they value and what they say they will spend rarely translates into reality at the checkout counter.
There is a quote in the lecture slides from Leo Tolstoy that summarizes this perfectly. He said, "Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself."
It's so true.
But I want to understand the mechanics of that gap for you listening. Like, why do we lie to the surveyors? We gladly tell a survey we'll pay 10% more, but then we don't.
Well, it's not necessarily a malicious lie. It's a mix of social desirability bias, wanting to be perceived as an ethical person, and the sheer cognitive load required to actually shop sustainably.
The cognitive load.
Yeah. Our modern economic system engineers the unsustainable choice to be entirely frictionless. When you walk into a store, the cheap imported good is right at eye level. It requires zero research and zero sacrifice.
Right. It is quite literally the path of least resistance.
Exactly. To make the sustainable choice, you have to actively fight the system. You have to research the supply chains, decode the packaging to avoid greenwashing, deliberately seek out alternatives, and ultimately accept a higher price point or a less convenient product.
So when you're actually standing in the aisle, looking at your wallet after a long day at work, comparing a $5 imported item with a $10 sustainably sourced item, the muscle memory of cheap convenience usually wins out.
We want the global machinery to change, but we aren't willing to endure the friction required to force the change.
Which brings us all the way back to where we started.
It does. Though the sources do highlight some emerging trends trying to bypass this friction.
Like what?
Things like collaborative consumption, sharing economies where communities pool resources, or just a growing awareness that sustainability doesn't always mean buying a premium green product. Often it just means consuming less overall.
Right. The most sustainable product is the one you don't buy.
Exactly.
Okay, let's recap the journey we just took. We started with the strict math of our biological allowance, right, that 1.5 global hectares. But our global demand is 2.6, forcing us to overdraw our Earth bank account.
We unpacked how global trade hides our true footprint through the outsourcing illusion.
Right, wealthy nations exporting their smog to developing countries. And then we translated that abstract global data into the calendar of overshoot.
Seeing how rapidly high-consumption lifestyles bankrupt the planet's annual budget.
And finally, we faced the reality of the intention-action gap, where our stated values, the things we tell surveys, rarely match our actual checkout receipts.
If companies only shift their supply chains based on regulations, technology, and consumer demand, it raises a really provocative thought.
Lay it on us.
What would happen if you viewed every single dollar you spend, not just as a purchase, but as a binding legal vote for the exact supply chain that produced it?
A binding legal vote.
Yeah. If it costs a 10 to 12% premium to cast a sustainable vote and inflation continues to pressure everyone's budgets, what happens to the power of that demand signal? Are we moving toward an economy where sustainability is stripped of its mass market potential and becomes just another luxury good?
Wow.
Available only to those who have the disposable income to vote for it. And if the power to shape the global supply chain becomes a luxury, whose values are actually going to dictate the future of our remaining 1.5 hectares? Does your current spending reflect the world you want to live in, or just the one that is most convenient today?